The entire contents of this podcast and website are based upon the opinions of Tami Garcia and her guests, unless otherwise noted. The information on this podcast is not intended to replace a one-on-one relationship with a qualified healthcare professional and is not intended as medical advice. It is intended as a sharing of knowledge and information from the research and experience of Tami Garcia and her guests. This is the Naturally Inspired Podcast, coming to you from our 1890 homestead in Johnstown, Colorado. I'm Tami, and I want to thank you for joining us. Let's get started and help people feel good so they can do what they love for longer. Today on the Naturally Inspired Podcast, we have Tami Ross, registered dietitian, on the show. Tami specializes in working with people who have diabetes. She is the author of 4 books, and her latest book, What Do I Eat Now?, helps people understand what they can eat to be proactive with dealing with diabetes. It was really interesting to talk to Tami, who is out in the field working with diabetes, and to get her perspective on how we can be proactive with pre-diabetes, what foods we can eat and what we can do to manage existing condition of diabetes, and much more. So I hope you enjoy this episode of the Naturally Inspired Podcast with Tami Ross, registered dietitian. Thank you so much for being on the Naturally Inspired Podcast today, Tami.
Oh, I'm excited. Thanks for having me. I look forward to talking and chatting and talking about my book, What Do I Eat Now?
Yes, I'm really excited to get going, and we share the same name.
I know, so that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
We bonded.
Yeah, but you're with an I, right?
Tami, yes.
Yeah. And what's your middle name?
So my first name is Tamara, and then my middle name is Noelle.
Oh,
so I wasn't born at Christmas, but I don't know why my mom chose that. But how about you?
It's Marie. But Marie's a very common middle name. So I thought, if her name's Marie, that's going to be a little
Then
weird.
that's going to be really.
But the chances are high. Because Anne and Marie, I mean, that's kind of how it rolls, isn't it?
Right.
Especially around, if you were born in the 70s or 80s.
Yes.
It seems to be very popular. So we always start on the podcast with our listeners kind of getting to know our guest. Yeah. So can you tell me a little bit about yourself? Where were you born?
Actually, I live in the town that I was born in, believe it or not. So I am in Kentucky, cool. In Lexington, Kentucky, right in the heart of Kentucky, central Kentucky. We're famous for the bluegrass here. So if you fly into Lexington in the summer, the grass actually does have a blue hint to it. And right in the center of horse country, and the famous Bourbon Trail is here. So lots of good stuff going on in Kentucky, but I was born here, raised here. When my husband and I got married years ago, we moved away to Cincinnati, Ohio, up in that area for a while. But, for us, family is just really important. It's a priority. Mm-hmm. And at that time, we had a young child, and so we decided to move back where family was, grandparents, so the cousins could grow up together. Nice. We thought we would move away again, but we never did. So I am in my hometown, which I think is pretty rare, nowadays, for a lot of people. Sure. Yeah. So
I always like the saying of prosper where you're planted.
That's right. We've been very blessed to be around family and have that support when our son was young. So, yeah.
So how many kids do you have?
I have one. One kid. Well, he's in college now. Yeah. So, this has been a transitional period of life. You raise them to fly, but when they do, it's a different phase of life. So, he's working on his master's degree right now in video communications. And so nice. We have an empty nest, but hey, it's good. It's all good. It gives me more time to write and do fun stuff like this. So
Right. Yeah. Good for you for transitioning so successfully.
I don't know. It depends on the day, right?
Right. I'm starting to get glimpses of that with a 17-year-old now. My son just turned 17 and my daughter is 14.
Okay.
So I'm, when they're little, it's like, you feel like that's, oh yeah, that'll happen. But like the
Yeah.
reality
Yeah.
doesn't set in,
No.
you're just like, oh, it's so far away. And
Yeah.
it's going to be different. You just can't really comprehend. And then as
No.
each year passes, the reality starts setting in like, yeah, this human is not going to be living with me forever.
I know. I think I lived in denial for a while,
Yeah.
When he moved out, I thought, oh, I'm going to redo his room. And, I just couldn't even go in there for a year. But,
Oh,
uh, well, not to feel bad. It's just
yeah.
like, I think I wanted to think if I don't touch anything, it'll be fine. But
Right.
anyway, we're transitioning. It's all good now. So, yeah, it's just, you never think that day's going to get here so
That's right.
quickly.
That's
So,
right. And so quickly is
yeah.
that's the key. You just,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
everyone tells you, oh, hang on to it. I can remember an elderly lady stopping me one time in the grocery store with when my kids were small,
Hmm.
and she's just the sweetest lady, and said, oh, you know, hang on to every moment because it goes by so fast. And I
Yeah.
remember that day, I had forgotten my diaper bag. My daughter needed to be changed.
Oh my
My
God.
kid, my son was like tired, and I just needed to get the groceries done so I could get home. And I just felt kind of like
Yeah.
rattled. And it was funny that she caught me on that day and said that. And it's
Oh,
kind of stuck in my mind.
yeah, it was impactful, right? It's one of
Yes.
those things you remember. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
So
Well,
tell me a little bit about being a registered dietitian. What is the difference between, being a registered
yeah.
dietitian and being a nutritionist?
So, the difference I think really is that for dietitians, we're registered dietitians. We went to college, had the full, there's a couple different routes you can go to become a dietitian, take a national exam, et cetera. Within Kentucky, at least, there's also a certified nutritionist. And so it's just they maybe didn't do the undergrad, but did a graduate program or have other training. So there is a
Okay.
little bit of a difference. The registered dietitian is a national registered credential. And
Okay.
so it was kind of interesting. When I was in college, I was going to med school. That was my goal. I had always loved science, very focused. And then my junior year in college, I'm like, okay, what do I want to do? What kind of doctor do I want to become? And
Yeah.
I thought I was going to go into pathology and become a pathologist. And so a family friend that was a pathologist actually was the county coroner too at that time. And I talked to him and I thought, I don't think this is what I want to do. But he, interestingly, introduced me to dietetics. I wasn't familiar with it. And I've always had a real passion for food as medicine, and
Yeah.
love your body. And I've always been very interested in the culinary aspect of food as well.
Hmm.
And so, very long story short, I ended up changing majors, changing colleges, and going on to get my dietetics degree and have never looked back and never regretted it. So,
That's
um,
awesome.
yeah.
And did
So,
you have a kind of a seed planted in you from a young age in your family? Were you all interested in kind of natural approach to health, or was there something there?
yeah. So, my mom, well, I come from, whoops, I just pulled my earplug out. I come from a family of great cooks. And, I had seen my grandmother struggle with some health issues, heart issues when I was young, and just seeing the impact of those changes that she made in her
Right.
eating habits,
Oh,
I
good
think were
for her.
really impactful on me. And then my mom always very focused on healthy eating. We had to have a balanced breakfast. We had to have our dairy and our vegetables at night. And so there was always that emphasis on healthy eating. Um, and she would try to feed us things like Brussels sprouts, and I hated them when I was young.
I hate them
Hated them.
now.
Oh, I love them now. I'll tell you that story. But, when we came home from school, if you saw Brussels sprouts or oysters, she liked oysters on the counter, I'm like, it's a bad day. But, the
I'll take the
funny,
oysters, but
you'll take that. Well, the Brussels sprouts, I never liked them until maybe 6 or 7 years ago. I had a client that I was working with that said, "No, you need to try roasting these." And she told me how she did it.
Hmm.
And now it actually is one of my favorite vegetables. And so in my book, What Do I Eat Now? I actually talk a lot about roasting vegetables and how that's a quick and easy way to toss them with a little bit of heart healthy olive oil, fresh
Hmm.
garlic, a little bit of cracked pepper, and it just brings out the sweetness in the Brussels sprouts and little crispy edges. And so now I love them. So I guess, from that early age, I was exposed to a lot of different foods and vegetables, and just, what my family health-wise was focused on. So it was impactful in my trail forward. So
Yeah. And so you're very focused on the diabetic community at this
yeah,
point, which I
yeah.
think is wonderful because boy, we're seeing those numbers really climb, aren't we?
Yeah, 1 in 10 in the US is kind of the estimate right now that's impacted by diabetes. And so, it's interesting, when I was in college in the dietetics program, we had a whole track on diabetes, and it was my most hated subject, hated topic.
Really?
And, it was like baptism by fire in my first job. That was a huge component. I worked in a rehabilitation hospital then. And,
Okay, yeah,
we saw a lot of people come in with complications from diabetes. And so
for
that was a
sure.
big aspect. And, the reason I hated it so much in college is because it was so confusing and complicated. There's so many
Right.
different aspects of management, and really it became my passion, because
Hmm.
what I embraced that, and I just was I really enjoyed helping people learn how to make small changes to make a big difference in their health. And so
Right.
my whole entire career moving forward has been focused around diabetes. I've worked in endocrinology and primary care settings, spent some time in research, and actually my day job now is working in public health. And what an interesting time to be working in public health.
Yes, I bet.
So yeah, I do a lot of writing and speaking and consulting on the side, but so that's kind of where my day job typically is right now. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Funny how something you hated ended up being, you were able to turn that into a passion. How was it, just because you saw such a need for it and you wanted to help people, or
It
how did
was,
you
and
flip it?
um, you know, I guess it was my second job. We had a family friend that was an endocrinologist, and that was during the time that we had moved back to Lexington. And so I was looking, for what's next, what's my next opportunity going to be? And they actually had an opening in one of the big endocrinology practices. And I'm always a person that will embrace the yes. Okay, well, let's give it a try and let's see what
Right.
happens. And so I just really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the opportunity to work with people, to problem solve, and to really help them feel better and live a better life,
Yeah.
based around what they wanted to do. And so, interestingly enough, we had a border collie that had type 1 diabetes. And
Oh
so,
my gosh.
yeah, so I've spent my whole career working in diabetes, also a certified diabetes care and education specialist and advanced credential. And it was 8 years ago, I guess, that he was diagnosed. And he was just drinking water, all the classic symptoms. We took him to
Mm,
the vet, and I knew what she was going to say, but I didn't want
right.
to hear it. But long story short, it really gave me that personal experience. And it was type 1 diabetes. So we had to give him insulin
Insulin.
shots.
Yeah.
But the vet said he probably isn't going to live 2 or 3 weeks. And he was 11 at that time. And again, I wouldn't take no for an answer. And so I figured out a therapeutic diet for him, and he lived 2 years. So, I mean,
Oh, wow. That's a
I know.
great
So he was our
story.
little experience with diabetes. We gave him like 1,500 shots, I think, in his
Wow.
whole experience. So, that just, my whole career was focused on that, and that just really brought it all home. And
Right.
so,
Interesting experience.
anyway, yeah.
So for those of us listening that don't know a whole lot, I mean, obviously I'm familiar with diabetes and what it is and all that stuff, but what is the difference between type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes?
Yeah, so you'll hear that, in the media and on the news, and people are often confused. What does it
Yeah.
mean? So, type 1 diabetes is what used to be called juvenile diabetes. And what
Okay.
we know now is that actually it can occur at any age. And there's actually more adult Americans now with type 1 than children.
Hmm.
But it is actually an autoimmune disease. And so the body attacks itself and destroys the cells in our body that make a hormone, insulin. Insulin's job is just to regulate the blood sugar. And so when insulin goes away, people have to take insulin either by injection or by a pump, continuous infusion.
Right.
Type 2 is a totally different beast, I would say.
Right.
It is the most common type of diabetes. About 95% of folks that have diabetes have type 2. It is very much
Wow, 95%?
about 95%, yeah.
Wow.
So it is actually where the body becomes resistant to its own insulin, or you may just stop making quite enough. And so lifestyle is a big factor in helping to manage type 2 diabetes. It very much runs in families, very much a genetic link. Here in Kentucky where I live, we are right in what's called the diabetes belt of the United States, where it's very prevalent, particular in rural eastern Kentucky. So, lots of opportunity here to help folks and focus on lifestyle to live a better life. So
Right.
they're
How
both.
much of that do you think is genetic versus habitual? Because if we see it in families, how can we differentiate whether it's actually genetic component when a lot of people don't get their genetics checked,
Mhm.
or if it's just like a habitual thing that's you tend to just pick up habits as you're being raised.
That's a really interesting question. I don't know that I've seen any statistics around that. If listeners want to know if they may be a risk for diabetes, there's an online risk test at diabetes.org that people can take. It's 7 questions, less than 1 minute to complete it. So diabetes.org, and you just click on take the risk test here. But it really walks folks through the 7 areas that can increase risk for type 2 diabetes and help people to get an assessment. If they take that and score 5 or above, that means you may be at increased risk. And so we always encourage people to talk to their healthcare team and say, hey, I took the risk test, how are my blood sugars looking?
Right.
You'll hear blood sugars called blood glucose too. It means the same thing. So I kind of use them interchangeably, so I don't want to confuse people.
Right, right.
But yeah.
Okay, so this is another term, like we've heard type 1, type 2, but there's also kind of another term that's come into play in the last few years, which I don't think I really ever heard when I was a kid or anything. Pre-diabetic.
Yeah, so pre-diabetes. So as the name kind of implies, it comes before type 2 diabetes.
Okay.
And so what that means is, you go in and get your, say, yearly blood work done, and over time you see your blood glucose gradually creeping up.
Okay.
When it gets to around 100 to the 125, that's kind of the pre-diabetes range. And the way I think about it is it's kind of, that's when you have the power to really make a change. It's a kind of a caution, yellow caution flag. And you may have heard of the National Diabetes Prevention Program. They are all across the United States. It's an accredited program that's really focused on helping people that have prediabetes or are at risk for type 2 to halt it and turn back the clock. So people often ask me, can you reverse diabetes? Well, there's a really good chance you can reverse prediabetes. And here in the U.S., 1 in 3 are estimated to have prediabetes, and it doesn't really have symptoms, so most people don't know it unless they're watching, their blood work.
Right.
Sometimes people that have prediabetes will tell me they're more tired than usual, and that can be just associated with the blood glucose being a little bit higher.
Right.
But
I wonder if that's a clue that maybe it isn't necessarily genetic. If we get these kind of warning signs first before it actually sets in, and then we're able to reverse it, is that a clue maybe that it could?
Well, what we know is lifestyle plays a big factor, so genetics definitely can come into play, family history. But it was interesting. I was talking to a doctor a few months back, and he said about half of the cases of diabetes he sees now have no family history. So, that's just an anecdotal story, but I think, to your point, lifestyle comes into play a lot. In terms of diabetes prevention, the National Diabetes Prevention Program really focuses on, first of all, weight loss. We know that losing 5, 7, 10% of your weight if you're overweight dramatically improves blood sugar. And so, for someone, say, that was 200 pounds, that might be losing 14 to 20 pounds, which most people say, hey, that's manageable.
Yeah,
I can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. The second big factor is physical activity. And
Mm-hmm.
so the focus is on really getting at least 150 minutes a week of moderate intensity activity. And so we're talking
Okay.
about, you don't have to go run, but
Mm-hmm.
if you can walk a mile in say 17 to 20 minutes, that's in that moderate
Yeah.
activity range.
That's interesting because I was just looking today. I'm doing some research about the kind of like guidelines of what typical like being in shape for your age is.
Hmm.
And this was
Hmm.
just like a graph that was, I think it came from what was it, like Mayo Clinic or something.
Okay.
So it
Yeah.
was like at the age of 40 to 45, then you should be able to run 1.5 miles in, I think it was 17 minutes or something like
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
So these are things I think we don't talk about much anymore.
Right, because things change,
Yeah,
with aging, things change, hormone levels change, strength and flexibility change. And so, what you were able to do, say, in your 20s may be
right,
different in your 40s or on up. So,
right.
I think that's a really important point, is
Yeah.
knowing what is
Yeah,
realistic.
because like when we were in
Yeah,
school, I mean, I mentioned to you earlier that I was born in Canada and raised in Canada.
hmm,
We had Canadian fitness in
yeah,
school,
yeah.
and I'm sure you guys probably had something like
We
that.
had something similar.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but after you get out of school, who's paying attention to that?
right.
Right?
Right. Well, then you go,
Like, where
maybe to
should I be at
college and
at
yeah,
40? Should I be able to run a mile? Like, where should I be at
some people
40?
can, but
Yeah,
yeah, it's like what is the norm then at that
yeah,
point? But really the focus I think is on just moving more and sitting less.
yeah.
There's strong evidence, recommendation that's come out that you should get up every 30 minutes and move around, that there's
Mm.
cardiovascular benefit. For people with diabetes, there's blood glucose lowering benefit. And so it doesn't mean you have to go, run around the block, but if you just simply get up from your desk or off the couch and walk around or do some stretches, that helps.
Yeah.
And
And small
um,
steps, right? Like, I think a lot of times people can get overwhelmed if they think, oh, that's just not me.
mhm.
I'm not an athlete, or I'm not this, or I'm not that. But you would be amazed, right? With just like a little bit of movement, and then
Oh,
how much
yeah.
that compounds over time. You actually want to do more.
Well, yeah, I'm a big advocate of the activity trackers, like the Fitbits or Apple
Hmm.
Watches that track your movement. And what I have seen over the years with clients I've worked with is when they wear something like that, it raises their awareness. And so I think
Absolutely.
about a dentist that I worked with, and she spent most of her day sitting because she was working, on people, on her patients. And
Right.
I got her to wear an activity tracker, and she said, I'm only moving 1,500 steps a day. And so the
Wow.
stretch goal for good health, is 10,000
1,000
steps a
steps.
day.
Yeah.
And so for her, that was a real eye opening, it
Yeah.
raised her awareness. And when she came back to see me a month later, she said, I've really been working on getting up and moving more. I'm up to 5,000 to 6,000 steps a day. And so
Mhm.
I think, to your point, it's that getting that awareness, and
Yeah.
little bits of movement help. We know
Well,
that.
and it's freeing too, because I think it can be, it can feel defeating. Like if you don't know the facts about, how many calories you're taking in,
Yeah.
how much you're moving. If you don't know the facts, you can get a mentality like, oh, it's so hard for me to lose weight.
Yeah.
I can't lose weight. I'm doing everything that I can and I still can't lose weight. Well, let's look at the facts here.
Hmm.
Right? And then
Hmm.
you're gonna, like, she found out 1,500 steps is not a lot of steps.
No, no. So, to put that in perspective, like 2,000 steps is about a mile. And if you were to walk the 10,000 a day, that would be about 5 miles, a movement. You're coming and going throughout the day. And so I've just always thought that was a really interesting example of
Yeah,
how that awareness really drove her behavior change without me doing anything.
right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm a big fan of that, just knowing where you're at. And, in my book, I focus a lot on small changes because small changes add up
That's
and
right.
they can lead to significant changes over time. It doesn't mean that if you think, oh, I need to lose that, 10%, that
Mhm.
I have to go on a drastic diet. It can just be small swaps, small changes that make
Yep.
a huge difference. I think about, It was a pharmacist that I had worked with maybe 6 years ago. And he was telling me kind of his story. And he said that, he went through a really busy phase in life, was working long, long hours in the pharmacy, and literally was living pretty much on Mountain Dew.
Oh
And
my
so, okay, so get this. So he was drinking 24 cans of Mountain Dew a day.
Oh my Lord.
Like, I can't even fathom it, but
Yeah.
this is such a great story where it goes. So he said he was doing that. He learned that he had pre-diabetes when he went in and had his checkup. And so for him, he's like, okay, maybe I can swap one regular for a diet Mountain Dew. And he continued to do that over time and eventually got down to one diet Mountain Dew a day from 24
Wow.
regular.
Wow.
And in that, he had cut out 4,100 calories a day and went on to lose 100 pounds. And that was a small
Oh,
swap. So,
great.
to that point, I think that's just a great testimony to
Right.
the power of small changes. Yeah,
Right.
how they
And
add
how they
up.
compound, right? You just want to do more, especially
Yeah.
when you get rewarded with a little bit of a result.
Yes.
Even, you start seeing the change and it's like, oh, well, maybe I could do a little more. Well, maybe I could
Yeah,
do a little more.
exactly. And so it's a
Yeah.
motivator, kind of those
Yeah.
little small victories. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, given, the present circumstance, I mean, it's almost impossible not to address what's going on, in
Yeah.
any conversation I have today. I think it comes up with COVID-19. But if ever there was a motivator really to take care of your health and be
Hmm.
proactive with your health,
Hmm.
this is certainly a very
This is the time.
this is a very motivating time. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about COVID-19 and
Hmm.
how an underlying condition like diabetes
Hmm.
puts us at higher risk.
Yeah, so with COVID-19, these are anxious days, and there's a lot we've learned. There's a lot we still don't know every day. We're hearing
Yeah.
new things that are happening in relation to it. But you'll often hear that people with diabetes should be extra cautious, and that's really related to that they are at increased risk for worse symptoms. So for
Okay.
um, worse outcomes, I would say. So it doesn't mean that they necessarily are at greater risk to get COVID, but if they do get COVID-19, the coronavirus, because of their compromised systems, they can have worse outcomes. So that's where managing blood glucose really becomes important, because what we
Right.
know and what the CDC tells us, the Centers for Disease Control, that if blood glucose is managed, that people likely are going to fare better
Right.
in the face of COVID-19. And so, it makes us think too about the importance of, having a list of your medications that you take, having a list of your doctors, having kind of that sick day plan, particularly for people with diabetes, so that if they do develop COVID-19 or another illness, that they have what they need to take care of themselves and to inform their healthcare team.
Right.
Also think about too the importance of having treatment for low blood sugar. If people with diabetes are listening, that they take insulin or other medications that could affect their blood glucose. So,
Right. What about pre-diabetic
yeah.
people? Do you think, they're at risk for not being able to manage it as well as somebody that was not pre-diabetic?
Excuse me. With prediabetes, we haven't really heard a lot about them being at increased risk for worse outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what we know is that it's tied primarily to blood glucose being above normal, or at least that's what we see right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so with prediabetes, I haven't really seen or heard much about the increased risk with that.
Yeah, I guess no data is really available at this point, but I mean, just common sense, if we're starting with a healthier baseline, we're going to be able to deal with anything that comes our way a little bit better,
Right,
right?
exactly.
Um, so, what are some proactive approaches to diabetes in terms of lifestyle? What are some things that we can, implement today? If, say, we are pre-diabetic and we know it, what are some things that we can work on just with our lifestyle and what we're eating to get going in the right direction?
Right. So, in terms of eating, I think the big thing is, again, building that awareness, thinking about Maybe you want to use an app to track your calories or your carbohydrate to see what you're eating. MyFitnessPal is one that a lot of my clients use. I'm going to grab something to drink here.
Oh, sure. No problem.
My throat's getting dry. But really, that awareness of what you're eating, your calories, for people with that are managing blood glucose, looking at carbohydrate is a big thing that we typically will look at because we know that that's what directly raises blood glucose.
Right.
So, that aspect. And then we've talked about the movement piece, how important that move more, sit less is.
Yeah.
So those are two things that will make a huge difference.
Now, when you talk about sugar, because you mentioned your pharmacist client, I mean, I don't even know how many tablespoons.
That's a story you'll remember, right?
I don't even know how many teaspoons of sugar. That blows my mind. I haven't had pop in probably 25 years, so I can't.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't drink regular.
Yeah.
So that one 12-ounce can is generally around 10 teaspoons. So
10
gosh.
teaspoons. Oh my.
He's drinking 24.
Isn't the body amazing though?
Yeah.
I mean, you think how long he was drinking 24 cans of pop a day and it was tolerating that.
Yeah. What was really interesting, the other piece I didn't tell you about his story is basically all he was eating was chicken nuggets because he would go through fast food. And when he went into the doctor, he actually had nutrient deficiencies.
Yeah. I believe it.
You think somebody working in healthcare. Yeah. But he freely shares his story, and I just think it's such a great, testimony again to that power of change. So
but don't you think in our traditional medical model, we just tend to, I mean, I think it's changing now clearly because we have people such as yourself that are dedicating to teaching people, how to eat to improve their health and stuff. But our medical doctors don't get nutritional training. They get like 4 hours of nutritional training. Yeah. So I'm assuming, pharmaceutical training doesn't include a lot of nutrition, right?
Right. So, and so, with this gentleman, he just really didn't know it different. Life got crazy. Life gets crazy for all of us, and he was just doing what he was doing until something happened and,
and then he had to do something about it.
Exactly. Yeah. So when he learned that he had prediabetes, I think for him, that was really the eye-opening driver for change. And just a really great guy. He went on to work with us some in our diabetes classes to share his story and tell people, hey, you can make small changes. I did it. You can do it too. Yeah. And I just really embrace that philosophy in my book and in practice because those small things, like I said, they add up. They add up to big changes. So.
Yeah. And I think people do need that encouragement too, to get started, because when we have a problem, sometimes it can feel so daunting,
It's overwhelming.
And what's the point if I just cut down like one pop a day? Like this, I'm trying to climb a mountain here. And that's just this tiny step. But just as the body put up with 24 cans of Mountain Dew a day, I mean, right there, that's an example of how bad your body wants to thrive.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it adapts.
Yeah.
It adapts. Folks that I see that come in that maybe are newly diagnosed with diabetes and their blood sugars may be 3 or 4 times normal. It's interesting because I often ask them, well, how do you feel? And they're like, I'm fine. Right. And their body actually adapts to that higher level and they do feel fine. But then when their blood glucose starts to come down, they feel bad because their body's gotten used to, it being elevated. And so again, it's those small changes to kind of bring you back to normal. But our bodies sometimes we're not aware resilient.
Of how bad we feel until we feel good. I've seen
and that's
with a lot of, that have come through a health journey. It's like, wow, I thought that being that tired was normal.
Yeah. And with type 2 diabetes in particular, that fatigue is one of the most common symptoms. People are familiar with the increased thirst aspect. That typically is more with type 1 diabetes. And sometimes I'll see that with type 2 because, but with type 2 diabetes, blood glucose tends to typically gradually creep up. People kind of adapt. They think, oh, that's just how I feel, or I'm just getting older, or work's just hard, or whatever.
Right. Right.
And then so often, once people get their blood glucose down, they go, oh, I didn't realize how bad I felt. I feel
Yeah.
so much better, so much more energy. A lot of the television commercials for diabetes medications that we see now talk about that energy aspect,
Yeah.
of it. So it's
Yeah.
definitely, yeah.
Interesting. So I want to clear up and talk a little bit about carbohydrates and sugar because,
Hmm.
you know, your title of your book is awesome because
Thank you.
it's what do I eat now? Right?
Yes. What do I eat now? That is the number
I
one
think
question.
I think everyone can relate to that
Yeah.
in this day and age because we've been through these fat-free fads. We've been through these, fake sugar type, things, and then now keto's a big thing. Like,
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
what? Okay, now I'm not allowed to have any carbohydrates. What? you know,
You are
it
so
gets a
right.
little nuts.
We've seen it all.
Yeah.
I remember when I first started my career, no concentrated sweets was the big thing. Everybody that had diabetes, no sugar, no sweets. And then we look at research, and research says, yes, you can have some, but it's all about fitting it in and tracking
Mm-hmm.
your total amount of carbohydrate. What's really interesting is the nutrition recommendations for diabetes and prediabetes. The new evidence analysis just came out about a year ago and was published. And what they found is that a variety of eating patterns actually can be helpful in managing diabetes and prediabetes. And so,
Hmm.
in that, the Mediterranean eating style is really acknowledged, particularly because of the cardiovascular heart health benefits of it.
Mm-hmm.
The low carb and very low carb are still acknowledged as beneficial eating patterns. And what I see in practice where those can be really helpful is people that are trying to avoid maybe taking another diabetes medication, or their blood sugars are high after they eat. Really focusing on bringing that carbohydrate down some can dramatically improve things there.
Okay.
What else? Low fat is still acknowledged as being beneficial.
Hmm.
There was a look at keto, and that can, it's popular right now, and that can be helpful. I think what you look at is the long-term sustainability, of
Right.
these different eating
Well,
patterns.
that's it, right? Like, what are you
Yeah,
actually going to apply? Because
right,
that's what's going to work the most. And
right.
the question I always have is, are we getting these results? Because even with keto, it tends to be like we'll overeat on potato chips because they're light and they're salty, and that's easy to overeat on.
Yeah,
But we're not overeat. How often do you overeat steak?
right,
Or
right.
like butter, right? Because you can't eat like a stick of butter.
You'd
That's
be
just like,
sick.
you'd just
Yeah.
be sick, right? So it boils down for me, it makes me question, like, is this actually the diet that's working, or is it just the restrictive calories and the fact that we're being more
Yeah.
satiated
I
with
think there's a
the
lot to
fats and
that.
yeah,
I think there's a
yeah.
lot to that. If you were to eat a very low fat, very high carbohydrate diet, which those were popular, there was a period back, I think in the 80s, when that was really popular. People would get hungry,
Right.
everything was fat free cookies,
Yes.
fat free this,
Yeah.
and they would get hungry. And so now the focus really is on fat isn't necessarily bad if it's a healthy fat. And so we're
Right.
talking about the plant-based fats that are liquid at room temperature, like canola oil, corn oil, olive oil, that kind of thing. And so really, in terms of diabetes and prediabetes, what the evidence shows now is it's more about the quality of fat you eat
Yes.
than the quantity.
Yeah.
With some of the eating plans like keto, where there might be eating a lot of butter, a lot of red meat, you're getting a lot of that solid animal fat.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you think about it, if you were to cook bacon and you had the bacon drippings and you poured those down your kitchen sink, what would happen, right?
Yeah.
Clogs it up. And
Right.
it's the same in our body. If we were to pour that into our body, it clogs up the blood vessels. And so that's where that liquid, good quality fat
Right.
comes
That's
into play.
interesting. I actually have an anecdotal story about that as a family friend. She got diagnosed with diabetes. I think she was probably in her 50s, maybe late 40s when she got diagnosed. And she was honestly badass. She decided,
Yeah.
I am not going on drugs. I'm going to
Yeah.
control this with my diet. And she lost weight and she became much more active, but she did cut out a ton of fat
Mm-hmm.
in her diet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And she actually consequently, and you know, who knows of the correlation, right? But she did eat an extremely low fat diet and she ended up getting Alzheimer's.
Oh.
So
Oh,
she passed from
wow.
Alzheimer's much later, you know, in her
Mm-hmm.
70s or late
Mm-hmm.
70s, I think. But I've always wondered about that correlation.
Hmm.
You know, she
I
was
don't
very
know.
thin. She was
Yeah.
very thin. And I know there are some studies about, you know, we're talking like good fats like avocado
Right.
and
Olive
those things
oil and
and
yeah,
brain
nuts and
function.
seeds. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
think as time goes on, we're going to see a lot more of this,
Mm-hmm.
these studies coming on,
Yeah.
especially with the keto fad and, you know, just this whole low fat thing that we all went through in the 80s.
Yeah. No, I
So,
think you're exactly right in there. There's research looking at the impact of diabetes and dementia and brain health
yeah.
and how are those linked. And there's some research that's looking into that at the University of Kentucky. They've got a whole center focused on that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think that's something that, is
For
on
the
the horizon.
future.
We're
Yeah.
looking at, but we still don't have a really clear picture of how that may be linked.
Yeah.
So
I'm
yeah.
excited for the future on that because, you know, we mentioned that these numbers are rising and they're rising in our youth,
Mm-hmm,
right? We're seeing fatty
definitely.
liver disease,
Yes,
something that
yes.
we didn't see in youth ever, right?
Right. And the incidence of type 2 diabetes in youth is definitely on the rise here in the US. And,
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of that is linked to sedentary time. If we think about the screen time of
Mm,
kids today versus, say,
it's
20
an
years
interesting point.
ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So kids spend so much more time in front of computers, social media, video games, sitting.
Yeah.
And there's not so much movement as there would have
Right.
been where kids were outdoors playing and didn't have all of that. So I
Right.
think that's a big impactor. I was watching a webcast last week about ethnicities and cultural foods and that kind of thing, looking at cultural groups that may be at higher risk for type 2 diabetes, particularly in children,
Mm-hmm.
and how food choices and their cultural native foods, play a role in that as well as portion control.
Right.
So I think those are a few different factors that may be linked to that.
Yeah. I hope they look more too at the family structure
Mm-hmm.
because, you know, back in the day, mom stayed home and cooked. And if pies and cakes and cookies were available, they were homemade.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And
Right.
now it's, you know, two parents working. There isn't time to make those goodies. And so they're often bought. And when they're
Yeah.
bought, they're made with more processed ingredients for
Mm-hmm.
cost effectiveness and
Yeah.
whatever other reason. But
That actually was a point on this webcast
was
that I
it?
was watching,
Yeah.
how the family structure and people would end up at corner markets and,
Mm-hmm.
little stores, and where it was primarily processed foods. And there are food deserts, in these highly
Yes. Food
populated
deserts.
areas
Yes.
where people may not have access to fresh fruits and vegetables, and they don't know what they don't know,
That's right.
or they may
Yeah.
not have transportation. In these days of COVID-19, I have a colleague that lives in New York City, right in Brooklyn, in the heart of it all.
Mm.
And she has type 1 diabetes, I believe, but just talking about the fear of getting on, mass transportation to try to get somewhere, to get,
Yeah.
a variety of foods, it's kind of where you can walk and what you can get. So,
Right. Right.
even so, yeah,
It's
there
fascinating to me because I heard, read about food deserts years ago, and it was mind blowing to me that in this
it
country we would
is.
have food deserts.
It
And
is.
just to clarify, that is when there's a community that is maybe only serviced by one small grocery store, and
Mm-hmm.
that grocery store can't just cost effectively. They cannot carry fresh produce.
Right.
So it's
Right.
all processed, like
Right.
cans, boxed, and very
Yeah.
rarely do they get a fresh delivery. And this is in the United
Exactly.
States.
This is in the United States.
Yeah.
I mean, in Lexington, in downtown Lexington, there's part of town that's like that. And there's a local nonprofit called Seed Leaf that actually what they are focused on is community gardens that are within
Oh,
these food
awesome.
deserts. And so the community helps to maintain the garden, and then they're welcome to come in to take whatever produce, it yields. And so I think there are 13 or 14 just in a few square miles within our inner city that really have been so beneficial to those populations. My son, when he was
That's
younger,
very cool.
volunteered on Saturday and helped maintain one of the big gardens. And, that being outside is a good stress reliever. And there's something about being out in the fresh air and sunshine and getting the
Yeah.
community involved. They're vested in it. And then to get that produce, it gives
Yeah.
them opportunities to get more nutrition than what the corner market might have. So,
Right. Yeah, I don't think you can't go wrong with that, right? I mean, even the skill of growing our own food, I think has been diminished over the years,
yeah.
right? We get separated, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, just how separated we are from the manufacturing of our food.
hmm Yeah, last summer, my husband and I, we bought into a CSA, a community supported agriculture, where we got a
Yeah.
delivery of, fresh produce every week. And it's really interesting. Research shows that people that belong to CSAs or maybe go to farmers markets every week and get that fresh produce are healthier, and they eat more fruits and vegetables. So,
Oh, wow.
really enjoyed that last summer.
Yeah, there's a synergy there, I think, of community and eating healthy,
There
right?
is, absolutely.
So
Yeah.
you're not only feeding your body well, but you're giving back, and
You're
there's a
supporting your
synergy.
local
Yeah.
farmers. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
that's a nice model.
yeah, I'm a big advocate of that.
Yeah. So you love to cook.
I do love to cook. Yes.
I mean, we're talking about, eating healthy and diets and stuff, but that can taste good, can't it?
It can. And, as I tell people, there are going to be those family foods that you enjoy, and it's all about moderation. You don't have to cut out everything that, excuse me, that you maybe grew up on or enjoyed, but maybe it's eating a smaller portion of it less often. And so, or maybe it's making some tweaks to your recipes. One of the chapters in this book deals with how do you renew recipes and make modifications
Oh, good.
to even some, traditional comfort foods, macaroni and cheese or,
Yeah.
chili or things like that. But just again, with small swaps that you can make in ingredients can improve the health of it. So,
Right. I always say
yeah.
that actually. There's a swap for that.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love
we
that.
we started making just since quarantine. We started making frappuccinos.
Oh,
My kids have never even had those anyway, but
yeah.
I found a recipe and I kind of tweaked it, and we were able to make frappuccinos, and they're pretty darn good.
What's in it? What's in your
Um,
version?
so it's ice, and
Mm-hmm.
we do decaf coffee for the kids.
Okay.
So we do French press coffee, decaf.
Oh, yum. Yeah.
Yeah, and then ice, and almond milk, and
Okay.
a couple of dates, and a banana.
Dates.
Yeah,
Oh, interesting.
yeah,
So
and a
that's where you
banana.
get the sweetness from
Yeah,
that in the banana. Oh,
yeah,
I love that.
yeah,
I love
and
almond milk.
yes, we're big fans of it here.
Yeah, we are
Yeah.
too. My
So yeah,
husband
just make a
grew up.
swap.
There's a swap for that, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Well, that almond milk swap is a big one because it can really reduce, for people with diabetes, it can reduce the carbohydrates significantly. And for people
yeah.
that are trying to embrace, a more plant-based approach, it's a great
Mm.
alternative. And so I
A lot
was
less
making
sugar in
a
that
lot
too,
less. Yeah,
right?
if you
Like
get
I
the
don't think people
unsweetened.
realize that how much sugar is in milk.
Yeah. So there's 12 grams of carbohydrate, which comes from milk sugar in a cup of milk. So switching to almond milk, or some people prefer, an unsweetened soy milk, it can reduce the carbohydrate, reduce that natural sugar. My story about that is my husband was raised on whole milk. When we got married, I converted him eventually to skim milk. And then I brought home almond milk, and he's like, I am not drinking that. And I was making smoothies or something with it. We ran out of dairy milk, and he had to drink it. And now that's all he wants to drink. He loves
Nice.
it. So, it's about giving yourself the freedom to try things. Maybe you don't like it the first time, but it's that exposure to it over time. I think they say you have to try something 7 times to like it.
Yeah.
So that's a good swap, that almond
Yeah.
milk.
Yeah, definitely. Now, what do you think about artificial sweeteners like aspartame and diet foods and versus trying to stay plant-based with something like stevia or monk
Hmm.
fruit sweetener?
That's a question I get asked a lot.
I
And,
bet.
with the low calorie sweeteners, what I would have listeners know is that they are approved safe by the Food and Drug Administration within the amount that is within the acceptable daily limit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, some people don't tolerate them. Some people don't tolerate things like milk or,
Yeah.
different things. And so the low calorie sweeteners, they may work for some people, not for others. There are a rainbow of colors of options out there, the
Yeah.
pink, the blue, the yellow, the green. But for people that are wanting to stick close to nature, plant-based approach, that stevia and the monk fruit sweeteners tend to be really popular.
Yeah.
So they are closer to nature. They're extracts from the plant, and kind of how I explain that is, you have vanilla extract that you may use in cooking
Yeah.
that is pulled out of the vanilla bean. These likewise are extracted from plants, and so they're natural, closer to nature for people that may be looking for a low calorie sweetener.
Does it have an effect on diabetes though? The
No,
Okay.
neither of them affect blood glucose.
Just very nice, isn't it?
Yeah, and so interestingly, there is a companion cookbook to What Do I Eat Now? The companion cookbook will be
Oh,
coming out
great.
late fall, and the recipe developer, she did most of the recipes in it, but she's used stevia in a great majority of them, just to try to keep and follow that plant-based approach. But there are things like baked goods, maybe banana bread, cookies, where you have to have a little bit of sugar to get the
Mm-hmm.
browning effect. And so, there's a place for a little bit of sugar, a place for a low calorie sweetener. They all taste differently. They all react in foods, hot and cold foods differently. And so
Right.
if you choose to use one, it's finding what works for you and using it in moderation. So,
Yeah, I like that.
yeah.
I think it's really wise to go with an approach of like, let's lessen the burden, not completely eliminate things.
Yeah.
Because when
Yeah.
we try to start like completely eliminating things, it can feel so restrictive
It
that
can.
you're not living your life.
Right, and I'm all about finding that moderation, that balance. Food should be pleasurable, and I think that really is acknowledged in the nutrition recommendations for diabetes, that food should be pleasurable. It's a pleasurable part of life, and you shouldn't cut out things unless there's a reason to do so. And so it's about small switches, small swaps, maybe removing a few things here and there, to get
Right,
you to a healthier place. But
right,
it's not all or nothing.
right, right. I think all or nothing approach is, it's tough.
It's tough,
It's a
yeah.
tough thing to adhere to.
Yeah.
Sometimes people think that eating healthy is expensive. Have you ever heard that from some of your clients?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's something frequently we'll hear, is that it costs too much to eat healthy. And
Yeah.
um, I actually co-authored a book several years back called Diabetes Meals on $7 a day or less.
Yeah,
And
I saw
so,
that.
yeah, so at that time it was based on, really illustrating that you can eat healthy on a budget for a small amount. It was $7 at the time. It might be a
Yeah.
little bit different now,
Yeah.
but really the concept was to show people, here are staples you can keep in your pantry, fresh things you can buy, ways that you can prepare them so that you can still enjoy healthy foods, but in a way that isn't going to, break the bank. And
Right.
so um, there's a number of strategies in there. Some of them are in What Do I Eat Now as well, but one is, really looking at sales cycles for stores, kind of knowing when things go on sale. Kind of my big story, recent story there is Kroger is our big national chain supermarket that we have here, and
Mm-hmm.
the one by where we live puts their meat on sale on Sundays. And so I went over there a couple months ago just to see like, oh, what do they have? Do they have chicken or whatever? Well, they had lamb chops, really lean ones on sale. And those can be pricey.
Right.
And so they were portion controlled, like perfect 3-ounce portions. Long story short, I got $85 worth for $12.
Whoa.
I know. So following the sales cycle. And so I just, I packaged them and froze them. But my point is you can save big money just by knowing when things go on sale.
Right. And planning ahead, right?
Yeah, planning, heading in with a shopping list. What studies show is that we spend $2 for every minute we're in the store. So if you can have a list that will get you through the store and out, you're going to save money. And that's kind of where planning meals comes into play. That's a really good strategy. And it doesn't have to take, hours. Right. Most people find they can plan 5 meals in 5 to 10 minutes, really just thinking about what is our family like, what are some of our favorite recipes, maybe looking at what's on sale, what do we have in the pantry. I usually will try to plan 5 meals, evening meals for the week, knowing that, we may order out or go somewhere. Before COVID, now we're on house arrest, but we're not going anywhere. Right. But, typically. And so I get up on Saturday morning when my mind is fresh and try to plan meals then. And then I've become a big fan of the click list, pick up groceries. Do you do that? Do you all do that?
Yeah, we do that quite often.
And I found that it really saves me a lot of time, and I can do it at a time that's convenient for me.
And you kind of get away from those impulse buys too.
Well, you know what? That's a really good point. Yes, you do, because you're not tempted by things on sale or at the end of the aisle or whatever. So, and then I know a lot of people are, my sister in Georgia, she's got 7 kids. And so she's become a fan of,
God bless her.
I know. She's become a fan of the mail order grocery or whatever it is, where you can order online and, they deliver to your house so that she doesn't have to take her kids out. But interestingly, her husband's a pediatrician, and they recently moved back to Georgia from Alaska. They were in Anchorage. And he actually is going to have to stay in Anchorage for 3 more months because of, quarantine and being able to move his practice and all. So she's at home with 7 kids, mail ordering groceries. So
so if you're listening to this thing and you got it bad,
there you go.
I bet you don't have 7 kids at home.
They just love children. He's a pediatrician. And, we would jokingly say every year she's either going to have a new baby, a new pet, or a new house. And that's been about true. So
I guess with 7 kids, you have to be upgrading as they grow.
I know. How about that? So anyway, she's mail ordering. So I'm doing click list, and she's mail ordering to get
It'll
groceries.
be interesting to see how this, if clicking and ordering online and stuff, I think some people have tried it for the first time during this period. So it'll be interesting to see if people keep up with it, if this is the kind of the new way of doing
norm.
It.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Who knows what the future is going to look like. Right.
Yeah. I know we talked about this already, about the title of your book, but was there, I mean, obviously there's so many diets and stuff, but how did you come to get that title specifically?
Well, that is the number one question that I hear in practice is, what do I eat now? And the American Diabetes Association has done a lot of research around it. And they said that's the number one question when someone is diagnosed with diabetes that they ask is, what do I eat now? I think originally we were going to call the book, What Can I Eat Now? But they said, no, it's What Do I Eat Now? And so I'm like, that's great. That works.
Yeah.
But, it's confusing. What research shows is it takes 143 minutes a day to manage diabetes. So that's like 2.5 hours a day. And half of that time is food related. And so really, my point is, if I can teach people strategies to make eating healthy easier and to know what to do and how to buy food that's healthy and good for you, and make those small changes that in the end, you can live a healthier and happier life. And we're all about that. So
I really like the idea of tying, your lifestyle habits, like synergistically in with your health, like
Mm-hmm.
planting a garden, because that like
Mm-hmm.
kills two birds with one stone. You're getting
Yeah.
outside, you're
Yeah.
eating healthy food, you're growing your own food, and you're taking in good
Yeah.
nutrients.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think
I
that's really a like kind of a different perspective to look at it. Like not
Yeah.
only, do I want to do this for my health, but this is like supporting community, and it's much bigger.
Kind of looking at the
Food
bigger
is
picture.
yeah,
Yeah,
food is so much more than just nourishing our bodies now.
it is. It's
It's become
culture,
entertainment for some
it's
people.
social. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's really a big topic, and I don't think
Hmm.
we often explore how many tentacles it kind of branches out into our
Yeah.
life.
It's across many aspects of life, just look at all the cooking shows on TV
Yeah.
now,
Well, I know we have celebrity chefs now. That was not a thing in the 80s. And,
No, no, and kids baking competitions but I mean, to your point, food is pervasive in many aspects of life. And so the intent of What Do I Eat Now is really just to help people know what to do kind of step by step and what strategies to take. And it was interesting with this, when you write a book, it goes out for review, to different reviewers. And
yeah.
one of the comments that we got back is, this book is for anyone, not just people with diabetes, that the
Oh, yeah.
content is just good, healthy, evidence-based principles that are going to help anyone eat healthier. And I think we want people to know that the food for people with diabetes is good for the whole family. It's a good,
Right.
healthy way of eating. You don't have to cook two separate meals. And so this book
Right.
really puts that into practice, I think.
Yeah,
So
that's a good point too, because I can imagine it's somewhat isolating when you first find out that
it
you've now
can't,
been,
yeah.
yeah, you've been put into this category, and
Yes.
you're now no longer like the rest of your tribe or whatever, your
People,
family.
I mean, that's very real that I hear
Yeah,
from people. They feel isolated, and there's something known as diabetes distress, and that basically is the distress of trying to manage all these different aspects of diabetes, and that no one really understands, and which they can't until you live or experience something. I
right,
mean, you can try to understand, but no one really understands until they walk in your shoes for whatever the situation may be. And so, to that point, yeah, it's trying to figure out, how do I meld all of this together,
yeah, yeah,
and not feel isolated. So, in the book too, we talk about strategies for eating out, when you go out to eat and manage special occasions
yeah,
and traveling. And so it's more than just, what do I eat at home, but what do I eat in all these different scenarios as
right.
well. So I
Because
really
that's
just try,
life, right? Like,
that is life.
yeah,
Yeah. And so it's just years of practice and working with clients and patients. I tried to bring the best of the best tips, to
yeah,
this. And many of them are strategies that clients brought back and said, oh, I do this or I do that. Like, that's a great tip. So,
yeah. Well, that's
so
great. That's a working relationship, which is what you should
yeah.
have with a healthcare provider,
Yes,
right? A
yes.
give and take, working
Yeah,
together.
I'm all about that, and all about leveraging, past successes to try to, how were you able to do this, and how can we do this more in the future? So really leveraging things that have gone well, and evaluating, where have I had success, and how can I do
Yeah.
more of that?
That's
So,
great. Well, it sounds like you are just an amazing resource for people dealing with diabetes.
oh, thank you.
Where can people connect with you?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter, Tami Ross RD. I'm on Instagram, LinkedIn, my webpage, which I'm in the process of updating, but people can still learn about me there. It's TamiRossRD.com. And, if people are interested in getting their hands on a copy of What Do I Eat Now, it's
Yeah.
available nationwide in bookstores. It's on Amazon.com. And then the American Diabetes Association online store, shopdiabetes.org. So, What Do I Eat Now? And this is the third edition, but it's about 75-80% new content. So,
Nice.
yeah.
Great. Well,
Yeah.
congratulations on the new
Thank
book. And
you.
thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for being on the Naturally Inspired podcast
I've
today.
enjoyed it. Great chatting with you. So
Yes.
thank you so much.
Yes. I'm sorry you didn't get to experience the hustle and bustle of the Kentucky Derby this year.
Well, I think the second time ever it's been rescheduled. It's in September now. So we shall see.
Oh,
Not quite the spring hats and all of that,
yeah.
but it'll be interesting to see what the attire is.
Oh,
So
well, I'm praying for you guys that
yeah.
definitely happens in September.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank
If
you
you're
so
ever
much,
down this
Tami.
way, come see us.
Will
Okay.
do. Take
All
care.
right. You
Bye-bye.
too. Bye-bye.
If the naturally inspired movement makes sense to you, let's do this together and transform the medical model and help people take charge of their health. Learn more about how you can join the Naturally Inspired movement by going to naturallyinspiredadvocate.com or call me at 970-475-4862.